In today's video, which will be episode 2 in our Vanguard series where we explore all of the different investment options on the Vanguard platform, today we will look at
America.
Because no matter what you have to say about our cousins to the west, good or bad, they sure do know how to make a bucket load of cash. Let's go.
American innovation, where to begin?
Well, I would argue that it all started in 1776 with a little book called Common Sense, written by a guy called T-Paine.
How's everybody doing?
Not that T-Paine, Thomas Paine, the father of the American Revolution, whose words turned a colonial squabble into a galvanised effort for independence from the British, converting a group of aggravated Britons
late 18th century, don't know about that thing,
into what we now know as Americans. And ever since then, they have been on one.
We will make America great again.
It was nylon.
The destroyer of worlds.
Cooking revolution begins.
Made by Motorola.
iPhone.
Sending people to Mars in a rocket ship.
From this little book of common sense, from this message of independence, a nation was born that would ultimately revolutionise the way we lived our lives countless times. Again and again, America has innovated and created, invented and thus cemented their position as a global world superpower. America, if you as a person, I would buy you a drink. I'm sorry, that was an awful T-Paine joke. But come on, you got to appreciate the effort that goes into these scripts. Who else is giving you early noughties hip hop on a Vanguard video? America now accounts for 55.9% of the world's stock market. For context, China's 5.4%. If the state of California was its own country, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world, right behind Germany. England is 7th. I'm not being funny, but I will take 7th. For a tiny little island country where we spend most of our time either drinking or comparing how much cheaper Aldi is versus Tesco's.
I just can't believe the savings. It's changed my life.
The American innovation machine has been so good at cranking out new ideas that we just can't live without, that the S&P 500, which is the top 500 or so businesses in America, has returned on average 9.8% per year for the last 90 years. No wonder we all want a slice of that
American dream.
But as is tradition, it's never just as simple as just buying America, is it? Vanguard gives us 3 different versions of the good old USA to buy. Whoa, whoa, I said, buy you a drink. I didn't say anything about your mates. So let's work out why they feel it's necessary to offer 3 versions of the ever-elusive
American dream.
Figure out the benefits and negatives of each, and then I'll give you my opinion on which of the 3 is my favourite. On screen now, you'll see I've broken this down into the fund names, the amount of holdings, as in how many businesses are in each fund, and then the fee, which I've expressed as a percentage. And for context, a 0.10 fee would mean that this fund costs you 10p each year for every £100 you have in it. Great stuff. All of these funds offer exceptional value. They are dirt cheap. Consider the world funds we looked at last time, where the fees are in some cases 4 times higher than these. They were still cheap, but these are really cheap. The S&P 500 leads the pack here, but has the lowest total holdings, so could explain the lower fees. Less companies invested in, less work, less fees. Obviously, the lower the fee, the better, but honestly, I'd be happy to invest in any of these based on those fees alone. Let's now look at how well they track the underlying index. Let's say you jump into a cab and say, follow that car. The car you are following goes straight on, but the cab you're in takes a left. You wouldn't be happy, would you? So an index fund's job is to track a predetermined list or an index of companies. The index is the list of businesses. The index fund is a pot of cash that tracks that list of businesses. We want to see that the index fund tracks the index closely. Vanguard makes this nice and simple for us. On the information pages, which I've linked below, we have a performance chart. On the left, we see the investment performance, and on the right, the performance of the index we're trying to copy. So on the left, in grey, is our taxi. The right is the car we're trying to follow. Honestly though, I never really have too many concerns when it comes to Vanguard and tracking accuracy. You'll find that the majority of their funds are pretty accurate, and we'll see that play out here. Interestingly, the S&P 500 appears to track the worst, but I'm splitting hairs here. All 3 funds are cheap and track the target index well. The obvious difference here that we need to discuss is the amount of holdings. And herein lies the main consideration that we need to make as investors when we're trying to consider which of these
American dream.
we want a slice of. So let's dissect each of the funds, starting with the one with the lowest holdings and figure out what they actually invest in. Starting with the S&P 500. This is the big boss Bowser of Vanguard funds, often the place where most new investors will start, and also, according to a lot of people, the only investment that you ever need. 509 are the largest businesses in America. I guess the S&P 509 wasn't quite as catchy. This fund focuses on very large businesses in America and includes the likes of Apple, Microsoft and Tesla. A full list of the investments held can be found on this tab here. At the bottom of this page, there's then 10 pages of companies that you can go through. Many would argue that the S&P 500 investment is all you need, and historically they've probably been right. The argument is that these businesses are so big that they don't just operate on an American level, they are truly global businesses. In a world where the American stock market makes up nearly 60% of the world's stock market's value, the top 500 businesses within the market are really global businesses, impacted by global events. The next fund is the North America UCITS ETF. I mean, basically this is the S&P 500 with a few of the biggest businesses in Canada thrown in the mix as well, which sounds great. You get the biggest businesses in America and then you get to diversify a little bit with some of the businesses from Canada as well. The point I want to make here is though that when reviewing the weighting, Canada only makes up roughly 4% of the value of the fund, making its impact on overall performance pretty limited. You have to go to page 6 of the holdings to find a Canadian business, the Royal Bank of Canada, which is the third biggest business in Canada, but only makes up 0.36% of the fund. So if you invested £100 into this fund, 36p of it will be going to one of the largest Canadian holdings, whereas Apple and Microsoft combined take up £10 of every 100. Now this is the case with all of these funds, the big businesses get the lion's share of the cash. But the point I'm making here is that the impact of the Canadian markets within this fund is pretty limited. The fortunes of Apple alone will have a higher weighting on the returns of your investments than the whole of the Canadian element of this fund. If you're looking for diversification, a better place to go is the US Equity Index. With its 3,729 different holdings, it offers a much wider range of diversification and access to the whole American stock market, watering down the impact of those big ass businesses. Don't get me wrong, the fortunes of Apple and all the other big American businesses are still going to weigh heavy on these types of investments. But in the US equity, Apple makes up around 4.63% of the fund, whereas with the other two, you're looking at around 5.25% for the Northern and over 6% for the S&P. The key difference is the other funds only aim to track massive businesses, whereas with the US equity fund, they describe it as tracking large, mid, small and micro-sized shares in the US, giving you a much wider level of diversification. So the decision you need to make here is, do I just want to invest in the biggest businesses in America, or do I want access to the whole American economy at once? Now, while past performance is no guarantee of future performance, let's take a quick look at the average rates of returns that these funds achieved over the last 5 years, so we can see retrospectively what the right choice was. On screen now is the averaged out historical performance for the last 5 years for each of these funds. The markets have been crazy in the last couple of years and these rates of return are really high. Don't look at this and think, sweet, 18% return a year is in the bag. Interestingly, the US equity had the highest rate of return over the last 5 years. It doesn't really surprise me much that though, because like in the UK here, we have the FTSE 250, which is business number 101 to 350 in size, and that typically outperforms the FTSE 100 because basically, I guess the logic is smaller businesses can grow more and perform better, whereas larger, bigger, more established businesses have a harder time growing at a rapid rate. But consider you're getting wider diversification. In the last 5 years, it has outperformed the other two. The US equity does look attractive. But on the counter argument, what happens if Apple has an amazing decade? You might limit your gains there. Last year, the S&P 500 rose 45% versus the US equity at 37%. When the times are good for the big boys, the US equity seems to lag behind the other two. A final point is the US equity fund is an index fund and not an ETF like the other two, which means dividend reinvestment is automatic, which is nice because it saves me a job. Another point to note is when investing in American companies, this applies to all of these funds, any dividends that you receive will be taxed at source by the Americans at a rate of 15%. So you get hurt a little bit there just for investing in America. If I had to pick one, it'd be the US equity, but honestly, I'd have any of these in my portfolio. From a wider perspective, the American markets have done really well over the last 10 years. The longest bull run in history. I personally have some slight concerns around some of the tech businesses that make up these funds being overvalued. A lot of money has entered the stock market. A lot of that money is from new investors, and a lot of those new investors see these tech giants as a safe place to park your cash, which has pushed values sky high. I would be looking to hold an American fund as part of a wider portfolio of index funds to provide some balance. I do think that the logic of, well, America is the world stage essentially, when it makes up almost 60% of the world's stock market, the S&P 500 is the world stock market. I get that and I completely agree. But when there's other countries and emerging markets to consider, why not have exposure to them? I just think Asia is going to continue to rise in influence and power. Come to think of it, maybe it's them that I should buy you a drink. So snap your fingers and do the step you've been doing now by yourself. Baby girl, what's your name? Let me talk to you, let me buy you a drink. I think we got it that time.